My name is Marina Hawthorne, and on this Christmas night, I learned exactly what my family thought of me. Elise clinked her glass, pulled her fiancé closer, and with that rehearsed smile she's worn since childhood, announced, "This is our family's biggest embarrassment," as she turned me toward her boyfriend, a SEAL commander. My parents chuckled, almost relieved someone finally said it out loud. The commander reached for my hand, polite but distracted, until the moment our palms touched. His grip tightened. His eyes snapped open as if electricity had shot through him. Then he stepped back so sharply his chair scraped the hardwood. And in the middle of my sister's perfect Christmas dinner, he raised his hand in a crisp, flawless salute. "Admiral Hawthorne, ma'am." The entire room fell silent. Forks stopped midair. My parents' smiles collapsed. My sister went pale. "Before we go any further, have you ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best? Tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is, because what happens next might change how you see loyalty, silence, and self-worth forever." I was 7 the first time I understood what less meant. It was Christmas morning in our little Denver townhouse, and snow was pressed against the windows like icing. Elise, 2 years older and already treated like she'd been carved from crystal and gold, was tearing into a brand new dollhouse 3 stories, real wooden shingles, tiny working lights, the kind of gift that makes a child feel chosen. I sat beside her with a polite smile, clutching a box wrapped in paper that had been used at least twice before. Inside was her old music box, the one she'd stopped using the moment the gold paint began to chip. "It still works," my mother had said with an encouraging nod. "And we're being smart with money this year." I remember asking, quietly, "Why does Elise always get the new things?" My father didn't look up from his coffee. "Because your sister deserves the best. She's our future, Marina. Our future." The words branded themselves into me long before I even understood what future meant. Elise beamed, spinning her new dollhouse doors open and shut while mine sat crooked in my lap, smelling faintly of attic dust. That was the first crack. Not the deepest one, but the first. Years passed, and I learned to swallow the things no child should have to swallow. By 14, I had stopped expecting fairness. I had learned to excel quietly, the way someone hides a bruise under a sleeve. That spring, I took the entrance exam for the Naval Academy preparatory program. Elise took it too, because she wanted to try something new. She breezed into the testing hall with lip gloss and a smile. I arrived with months of studying, and a mind sharpened by determination no one ever bothered to see. When the results came out, I had earned the highest score in the entire state. Elise did not. She hadn't even passed. I found the letter in the mailbox, first thin for rejection, thick for acceptance. My name printed at the top in bold black letters. I stood there in the driveway, the paper trembling in my hands, heart soaring for the first time in my life. I was finally enough. I was finally something. But then my mother's voice sliced the air. "Give me that." She snatched the envelope, scanned the letter, and her expression didn't change. Not pride, not surprise, nothing. It was the nothingness that hurt the most. She tucked the letter into her coat pocket before Elise came down the stairs. That evening, with the entire extended family gathered for Sunday dinner, my mother tapped her glass for attention. "Everyone," she said proudly. "Elise is our star. She worked so hard. Marina, well, she did fine. Average, really. Average." I remember looking up from my plate, my fork freezing midair. She had erased my achievement with a single sentence. No one questioned it. No one even looked my way. Elise accepted hugs and praise for an accomplishment she hadn't earned, and I sat there with my acceptance letter hidden in my mother's coat like it was contraband. But the deepest wound didn't come until 2 years later. 16. An age when some girls discover confidence, and others discover that confidence was never meant for them. I was standing in front of the hallway mirror wearing my JROTC practice uniform. A uniform I had ironed 3 times, polished shoes until they gleamed like obsidian, tied my hair into the tightest regulation bun my fingers could manage. I felt strong. I felt possible. But my mother walked past, stopped, looked at me through the mirror, and something cold flickered across her face. "Take that off," she said flatly. "You'll never be leadership material, Marina. Don't embarrass us." Embarrass us. 2 words shaped like a slap. I remember my throat tightening, the buzz in my ears, the burn behind my eyes. I refused to let spill. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say that my instructors called me the most disciplined cadet in the program, that I had been selected for state drills, that I had earned medals Elise never even attempted to chase. None of it mattered. Not to them. Because Elise was the daughter they had chosen, and I was the daughter they tolerated. So I learned to be still. To be silent. To become the shadow in my own house. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I last stepped onto the front porch of my parents' house, the same porch where I once sat polishing my JROTC boots in the cold, hoping someone inside would notice. 5 years since I walked away without looking back, carrying only a duffel bag and a silence no one ever asked to understand. The world had shifted in those years. I had shifted. But this house was frozen in time, like it had been waiting for me to return unchanged. The lights were already strung along the roofline when I arrived, glowing warm and soft against the Denver snow. The wreath on the door was new Elise's taste, no doubt, but everything else was painfully familiar. The faint smell of cinnamon from my mother's candles, the muffled Christmas music she played every year, the feeling of stepping into a place that called itself home but never truly was. My mother opened the door with her usual polished smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. She scanned me quickly, as if checking whether I had improved or worsened in the years she hadn't bothered to ask about. "Marina," she said, crisp and composed, as though saying my name out loud were an obligation she needed to fulfill. "You made it." I set my bag down, offering the smallest nod. "I did." She stepped aside, and I walked into the warmth, into the noise, into the familiar feeling of being both present and invisible. The living room was already filled with cousins, uncles, and distant relatives I barely recognized. Their laughter echoed through the hallway, but when someone glanced my way, the reaction was always the same, a flicker of polite confusion followed by the quick realization. Oh, the other daughter. The one who left. My father appeared from the dining room, adjusting the sleeve of his sweater as he gave me a nod far too casual for a reunion after half a decade. "Good to see you, kid," he said, as if greeting a neighbor's child. Then, without waiting for a reply, "Your sister's already here. Try to be supportive tonight." Supportive. The word tasted familiar, stale, obligatory, expected. "Of course," I said softly. My mother clasped her hands together, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "And Marina, don't cause a scene tonight. Elise deserves a perfect Christmas." There it was. The line she'd polished over a lifetime, uttered at piano recitals, school banquets, birthday dinners. "Don't ruin this. Don't overshadow her. Don't make it about you." She spoke as though my very existence were a threat to the illusion she had built around Elise. As though I had ever been the one to cause tension in this family. I bit back the urge to laugh, offering her the smallest, most controlled smile. "Don't worry," I said. "I won't." She exhaled, relieved, already turning away to greet another guest because once I gave the expected answer, she no longer needed to look at me. As I moved deeper into the house, I noticed the framed photos lining the hallway walls. Elise graduating with honors. Elise accepting a leadership award. Elise with her coworkers at some glamorous company gala. Even a photo of Elise standing by a beach, wearing a sash that said bride-to-be. And then there were the photos of me reduced to 2 small pictures tucked near the staircase. One from middle school. One from a high school birthday. Nothing after age 16. To them, that was when my story ended. As far as my family knew, I had dropped out of the Naval Academy halfway through training. Lack of discipline, my mother once told a relative loud enough for me to hear. Rumors followed. I had been expelled, fired, homeless, in debt, traveling aimlessly, a drifter, a disappointment, a burden. I never corrected them. That was the point. Their assumptions had protected them without them knowing. Being underestimated had been my greatest shield. And yet, standing in that house again, hearing the same condescending whispers slip through the walls, I felt something both familiar and distant, a dull ache of old wounds that had healed into scars only I could still feel. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't the girl staring into a hallway mirror, hoping for approval that would never come. I had been forged in places my family couldn't imagine, shaped by missions they would never hear about. Their version of me was a ghost, a myth, a convenient disappointment they could point to whenever Elise needed to shine brighter. And here they all were again, preparing for a perfect Christmas one where Elise was the star, the center, the beloved daughter, and I was the quiet shadow returning from nowhere. My mother's last words echoed in my head, "Don't cause a scene tonight." I almost smiled. Not because I intended to, but because they had no idea how impossible that request would soon become, no matter how silent I tried to be. And as I hung my coat on the same old rack I used as a teenager, a familiar realization settled over me like falling snow. I didn't come here to prove anything. I came because despite everything, despite years of distance, some part of me still wanted to see whether this house could ever feel like more than a memory of a place I once survived. Spoiler, it couldn't. But they would learn that on their own soon enough. The living room felt smaller than I remembered, even though nothing about it had physically changed. The same cream-colored walls, the same oak coffee table my father refused to replace, the same mantle cluttered with Elise's framed achievements. The only thing that had changed was the number of people packed inside, relatives spilling into every corner, their voices rising and falling like waves of admiration that all crashed in the same direction. Toward Elise. She stood in the center of the room, draped in a deep green velvet dress, the kind chosen specifically to draw attention under warm Christmas lights. Her hair was curled to perfection, her smile wide and practiced, her hand always lifted just enough to show off the engagement ring that sparkled with the self-importance she'd worn her whole life. "Tell us about the proposal again," Aunt Lorraine squealed. Elise pressed a hand to her chest dramatically, as if the memory itself were too beautiful to hold. "Oh, it was perfect," she said. "He planned everything. The rooftop, the lights, the music. He even had my favorite champagne flown in. And he's a SEAL, right?" Another cousin chimed in. Elise nodded proudly. "Commander, actually. He's on deployment right now, but he'll be here later tonight. He's so disciplined. So impressive." I sat on the far end of the couch, half in shadow, half forgotten like a misplaced decoration someone didn't have the heart to throw away. My hands rested calmly in my lap, my posture straight out of habit rather than confidence. Their voices filled the air around me, warm and lively, but none of it touched me. I wasn't part of the circle. I wasn't meant to be. "And Elise has been doing so well at work," Uncle Grant added, his voice booming over the chatter. "You're really moving up in that company." Elise laughed modestly, tilting her head just so. "Oh, well, they appreciate hard work. Not everyone is cut out for it, you know?" Her eyes flicked to me for half a second sharp, pointed before sliding back to her audience. A few relatives followed her gaze and then quickly looked away, as though making eye contact with me might invite some sort of misfortune. Aunt Lorraine leaned in conspiratorially and whispered just loud enough. "She's always been the ambitious one." "Elise was born driven," my father added, taking a slow sip from his whiskey glass. "She's our star." I wondered if he even realized those were the exact words my mother had once used to erase my Navy prep acceptance. Probably not. People repeat the lines they believe most. Meanwhile, I sat perfectly still, absorbing every word the same way I had since childhood, quietly, invisibly, like my existence came with a built-in mute button. "Oh, show us the ring again," someone else said. Elise extended her hand dramatically, the diamond catching the warm glow of the Christmas tree lights. Gasps and murmurs of admiration floated around her. "He has excellent taste," Aunt Meredith said. "Well," Elise preened, "he says I deserve the very best." "Of course she does. She always did." I shifted slightly, and instantly felt eyes dart away as though I'd broken some unspoken rule. The shadow was not supposed to move. My mother crossed the room to refill her wine and paused right beside me, not to acknowledge me but to use me as a prop in her script. "She still hasn't found direction. Poor thing," she said, voice soft enough to mimic concern but loud enough for the nearest 5 guests to hear. My body stayed still, but a familiar, almost nostalgic burn pressed behind my ribs. "Poor thing." The same phrase she used when I brought home medals Elise never earned. The same phrase she used when she explained my supposed failures to relatives. The phrase that reduced me to a harmless, pitiful afterthought. A few guests glanced my way with sympathetic smiles, the kind people give to strangers on the street, not family. "It must be hard," Aunt Meredith whispered. "You know, not having a stable life." "I heard she left the academy," someone else murmured. "Dropped out. Or got kicked out," another voice offered. "Discipline issues, I think." I kept my expression serene, letting the comments wash over me as if they were raindrops sliding off coated metal. None of them knew how close to the truth they were, how cleverly the cover story had been built. None of them realized the bruised, aimless silhouette they joked about was the very thing that had kept them all safe for 5 years, and none of them cared to know. Elise laughed again, louder this time, reclaiming the spotlight. "Well, we can't all have perfect lives, right? Someone has to be the family's free spirit." Free spirit. That was a generous upgrade from disappointment. My mother didn't correct her. My father didn't blink. And the relatives didn't question a thing. Instead, they turned to Elise with admiration that bordered on worship, as if she were made of something more refined, more worthy. Something more than me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even frown. Because for the first time, sitting there in my designated shadowed corner, I fully understood something. They had built an entire world where Elise shined because someone else me absorbed all the dimness. They needed me to be small so she could be big. They needed me forgotten so she could be remembered. They needed me to be the family embarrassment so she could be the family pride. And tonight, wrapped in the warm hum of their praise, they truly believed that nothing could disrupt their perfect Christmas. They had no idea that the foundations of their illusion were already cracking. No idea how close the truth was. No idea how quickly everything they believed about Elise, and about me, was about to shatter. And as their laughter swelled around me, I simply folded my hands a little tighter in my lap and waited. Because the storm they feared was not the one they imagined. It was already in the room with them, silent, patient, and wearing my face. Dinner was announced with the usual fanfare, my mother tapping a fork against her crystal glass, urging everyone into the dining room as if she were hosting a royal banquet rather than a family gathering built on illusions. The long mahogany table was already set, draped in red and gold, candles flickering between polished plates and evergreen garlands. I took my seat at the far end, the place they had always assigned me, where the light was dimmer and the conversations drifted past without landing. Elise sat near the head of the table, in the chair that used to belong to my grandfather, an unspoken symbol of who mattered most in this house. She looked radiant with attention, her smile perfectly arranged to fit the role she loved most. The center of everything. The meal began with chatter and clinking cutlery. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal, if normal meant everyone politely ignoring me while discussing Elise's wedding plans, Elise's fiancé, Elise's new promotion, Elise's stress, Elise's triumphs, Elise's future. My future, apparently, was not worth place-setting. Halfway through the main course, herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables, my mother once again tapped her glass. The room quieted instantly. Elise rose gracefully, pressing a hand to her chest in mock modesty. "Oh, Mom," she laughed, "you're embarrassing me." "Nonsense," my mother beamed. "You deserve this moment." Elise's eyes sparkled. "Well, if everyone insists." Of course, everyone insisted. Elise launched into a speech with the practiced confidence of someone who had always been applauded for simply existing. She talked about her latest project at work, her leadership role, her grit, her dedication. The audience reacted right on cue, nodding, gasping, admiring. And she added dramatically, "I've been balancing all of this while planning a wedding to a SEAL commander. It's been a whirlwind." A round of soft applause circled the table. She giggled and waved it off. Okay, enough about me." She paused. Then, with a sly smile I recognized too well, she turned toward me. "Actually, no, not enough about me. Because I think it's important to talk about where we came from and how far some of us have come." The table hushed. I set my fork down, already knowing where this was going. Elise placed a hand on her hip. "As you all know, I worked incredibly hard to get to where I am. I pushed myself. I committed. I never quit." She tilted her head innocently. Unlike Marina. A few people shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift but not enough to intervene. She dropped out of the academy. Elise continued with the lightness of someone commenting on the weather. "No discipline. No commitment. She just didn't have what it took." My father chuckled, shaking his head as though recounting a funny childhood story. "Well, she did try. That counts for something." My mother chimed in, eyes glimmering with false sympathy. "Yes, she just wasn't meant for that level of pressure. Not everyone is built for structure. Or success," Elise added sweetly. The room tensed just slightly, but no one challenged her. Instead, a cousin leaned in, smiling at me with the kind of pity that felt more like a bruise. "So, what do you do now, Marina?" Another relative joined in. "Are you working, studying, traveling, anything?" "Anything." As if the possibility of nothing hovered naturally around me. As if my life could be summarized as an empty shelf. Elise took a sip of wine, watching me with the satisfied air of someone expecting me to flinch, to deny, to scramble for dignity. But I didn't. I smiled. Small, calm, steady. "I'm doing fine," I said. "Thank you for asking." A few guests exchanged looks, the kind that suggested they were hoping for more, a confession, maybe. An explanation that fit the narrative they'd built around me. But I offered none. Silence, I had learned long ago, can be more powerful than any justification. Elise wasn't satisfied. "Oh, come on, Marina. Don't be vague," she prodded. "Everyone's curious. You've been gone for 5 years. No updates, no career posts, no milestones. You disappeared. So what exactly have you been doing?" I folded my napkin neatly. "Living." My sister scoffed. "Living where? Living how? Mom said you were bouncing around. Dad thinks you're job hopping. Cousin Meredith said she heard you were working in retail. Or was it a coffee shop?" Uncle Grant added helpfully. A burst of laughter rippled across the table. Not cruel, just dismissive. The kind that stings because it's so casual, so effortless. My mother smiled thinly. "Well, at least you seem healthy. That's something." Elise nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, at least you're here. Here, present. Unaccomplished. Bland. Elise has just done so much." Aunt Lorraine sighed admiringly. "She's such an example." Elise shrugged modestly. "Some people are just built for greatness." My father raised his glass. "To Elise, our pride." Glasses lifted. Mine remained on the table. No one noticed. The toast ended. Elise sat, satisfied, glowing in the light of her own spotlight. The room swelled again with conversation around her, returning to wedding dates, color palettes, honeymoon options. I took a sip of water. My heartbeat remained steady. Because humiliation only burns if you expect dignity from the people delivering it. And I no longer expected anything from them. Not love, not fairness, not recognition, not truth. They had no idea how wrong they were about me. They had no idea that every jab they threw only made what was about to come feel sharper, more poetic, more inevitable. The storm was approaching, and they didn't even feel the wind. I offered my sister one more small, unreadable smile. It unnerved her for a second, just enough. Then the dining room doors opened, footsteps echoed, conversations died, and the man they'd all been bragging about finally walked in. The shift they never saw coming had just begun. The dining room doors swung open with a soft but commanding weight, the kind that makes a room rearrange itself without anyone consciously deciding to. The conversations tapered off mid-sentence, forks froze halfway to mouths, and every head tilted toward the tall figure stepping inside, shoulders squared, posture crisp, uniform immaculate even beneath his winter coat. Commander Blake Rowan had arrived. The phantom fiancé Elise had been bragging about all evening. He shut the door behind him with the quiet precision of someone who had spent years learning how to move without echoing. Snowflakes clung to his collar, melting into the navy fabric, and his jaw was shadowed with just enough stubble to prove he had come straight from a mission. Not a flight. Not a base. A mission. The kind that didn't show up on paper. The kind that rewrote the gravity of a room the second he entered it. Elise practically leapt from her chair, beaming like she'd just been handed the lead role in a Broadway show. "Blakey, you made it," she squealed, wrapping her arms around him like she wanted the entire family to witness how lucky she was. He returned the hug politely, warm enough to be respectful, distant enough to be unmistakably professional. My parents stood, eager to display him like he was a war medal mounted above the fireplace. "Commander Rowan," my father said, voice unusually soft. "Honored to have you here tonight." "Truly honored," my mother echoed, her hands clasped in admiration. "We've heard so much about your work. Elise speaks of you constantly." Blake nodded with a small, practiced smile. "Thank you, sir, ma'am. It's good to finally meet the family." My relatives crowded in, circling him like moths around a floodlight. "You just returned from deployment? Was it dangerous? You must see some intense things. You're a real American hero. Die. And each time, he dipped his head modestly, offering the same neutral, guarded replies I had heard 100 times in briefing rooms, corridors, debrief halls. He looked exactly like what he was, the kind of man the military shaped with precision and the government hid when necessary. A man trained to protect things no one else knew were under threat. My family adored him instantly. Elise, glowing brighter than the candles on the table, clung to his arm with a triumphant look, as if she expected me to shrink further into my chair at the sight of him. "This is my fiancé, everyone," she declared proudly. "Commander Blake Rowan. United States Navy, SEAL." The room chorused gasps, murmurs, applause. Someone even stood to shake his hand. Meanwhile, I remained seated at the far end of the table, hands folded neatly, expression calm. It was the same composure I had used in far harsher, far more dangerous rooms. Blake's gaze drifted across the table as he responded to the flood of congratulations. His eyes swept over each face, cataloging, assessing an instinct that never turns off, especially after coming straight from a classified assignment. But then his gaze landed on me. Not in passing. Not by accident. It lingered. For a moment. Then a moment longer. Long enough for someone across the table to notice. He blinked. His expression didn't change, but something flickered, a tug of recognition he couldn't quite place. Elise followed his line of sight and forced a laugh. "Oh, Blake, you haven't met my sister yet. That's Marina." She said my name as if it were an unfortunate footnote. Blake nodded politely, his eyes still fixed on me. "Marina," he repeated, like the syllables tasted familiar on his tongue. I inclined my head with controlled politeness. "Commander Rowan." That was all. A simple greeting. But his posture shifted subtle, involuntary. A tiny straightening of the spine, a narrowing of the eyes, a micro-expression that someone untrained would miss, but I saw it instantly. He was searching his memory. Somewhere in his mind, a file had cracked open. Yet he didn't find the answer, not yet. He blinked again, shook it off, and turned back to Elise with a smile that looked just a shade forced. "It's good to meet you, Marina." My sister leaned into him. She's the one who dropped out of the academy, couldn't handle military structure. The table hummed with polite, pitying laughter. Blake didn't laugh. Not even close. Instead, he looked at me again more intently this time, as if Elise had just handed him a puzzle piece that didn't fit. He studied me the way SEAL operatives assess a threat, quietly, instinctively, beneath the surface. A slight shift in his breathing. A hint of tension at the jaw. A flicker behind the eyes. Something wasn't aligning in his mind. Good. It wasn't meant to. My mother chimed in with her saccharine voice. "Marina's still trying to figure out what to do with her life, but we're glad she made it tonight." Relatives nodded, murmuring in agreement. Blake's brows pulled together, only for half a second. But long enough. Elise tugged his attention back by waving her ring at him. "Everyone wants to hear about your proposal again. Tell them how you planned the whole thing." He allowed himself to be guided toward the head of the table, recounting the story as expected, hitting all the beats Elise adored. But every so often between sentences, between breaths, his eyes returned to me. Still searching. Still trying to place the memory. He didn't know yet. Not consciously. But his instincts recognized me before his mind did. And that was enough. Because while Elise basked in her moment, while my family admired the decorated hero they believed belonged to her, while the room glowed with lights and laughter and self-satisfaction, a single truth simmered just beneath the surface. Blake Rowan had met me before. Not in this house. Not in this life. But in one of the world's dark, classified corners where names weren't spoken aloud. He didn't remember yet. But he would. And when he did, the entire illusion my family clung to would crack clean down the middle. Tonight was only the beginning. The room slowly settled back into its rhythm after Blake's entrance, but something in the air had changed subtly, imperceptibly, like the quiet shift before a storm rearranges the clouds. Elise couldn't feel it. My parents didn't sense it. The relatives were far too busy admiring the shiny new ornament at the head of the table to notice, but Blake felt it. His eyes kept drifting back to me, catching on details he wasn't consciously processing yet. The posture, the restraint, the stillness, the kind of silence that wasn't insecurity, it was training. Highly trained silence. And Elise, oblivious to the silent unraveling beside her, tugged at his arm with a bright, brittle laugh. "Blake, honey, come sit. You must be exhausted." He took the seat of honor beside her, but he didn't look away from me until the last second. My sister noticed that. Oh, yes, she noticed. And nothing in the world irritated Elise more than a tension that didn't stay glued to her. Her smile tightened, just a fraction. Enough to read her next move before she even made it. She picked up her wine glass, lifted it lightly, and tapped her manicured nail against the rim. A chime rang through the room, soft but commanding enough to gather everyone's attention. "Everyone," she announced sweetly, "before we continue eating, I want to do something special." My stomach didn't knot, my heart didn't spike. I'd seen the pattern too many times. This was Elise's favorite sport, public, gentle, faced humiliation disguised as sisterly affection. "Marina," she said, turning toward me with a smile that had no softness at all. "Stand up for a second." The table turned as one curious, expectant, some amused. I rose slowly, smoothing my hands down the front of my sweater, keeping my breathing even. Elise beamed like she'd just set a perfect trap. "Before you meet my future husband officially," she said, clutching Blake's arm possessively, "you should all know Marina never made it through training." The words hung in the air, delicate and vicious. A few people laughed under their breath. Others glanced between us with the kind of pity reserved for someone who'd fallen off a stage during a school play. My mother offered a poor imitation of sadness. It just wasn't the right path for her, she said to no one in particular. She struggled with structure. My father chuckled, swirling his wine. Could never follow through on anything, really. But we still love her. We still love her. As if love were a prize I had to be grateful for despite offering nothing in return. Elise waved her hand dramatically. There's no shame in it. Not everyone is built for military life. Definitely not elite, level training like Blake, right, honey? Blake didn't respond at first. He was staring at me again long, studying, piecing together fragments he didn't yet understand. The silence stretched. Elise nudged him lightly with her elbow. Right, babe. He blinked out of whatever thought held him. Right. Training's intense. But his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes flickered with something dangerously close to confusion. Elise brushed past it with a laugh. She stepped closer to me, placing a hand on my shoulder like a benevolent queen blessing her lowly subject. We're all proud of you for trying, Marina, aren't we? Murmurs of agreement circled the table. I stayed still, calm. The same calm that had carried me through interrogations, deep cover operations, and briefing rooms where one wrong breath could unravel missions years in the making. Anyway, Elise continued cheerfully, pulling back her hand. Now you get to meet a real military success. She motioned for Blake to stand. He hesitated. Not long. But long enough for me to catch it. He rose with slow, deliberate movement, uncertain, wary, his intuition screaming even if he couldn't pinpoint why. Elise gestured between us like she was introducing a child to a decorated war hero. Blake, this is my sister, Marina. She tried to be a soldier once. Laughter fluttered around the table again. Not malicious, worse. Dismissive. Blake looked at Elise. Then at me. Then back to Elise. Something didn't fit. His body betrayed his confusion, a squared shoulder, a faint tightening around his eyes, a spark of recognition he couldn't voice yet. Still, he extended his hand toward me. Polite. Respectful. Mildly reluctant. That last part was Elise's influence, not his. I looked at his hand. A normal person would have flinched or rushed to take it. But I simply lifted my gaze to his, holding it for a single, weighted second before placing my hand in his with controlled precision. His grip tightened just slightly. A reflex, an instinct. A flash of memory. And there just for an instant something passed across his face. A flicker, a shadow, a spark. Recognition trying to claw its way through a wall. But not yet. Not enough. Elise clapped joyfully, oblivious. See? Finally, you two meet properly. Properly. If only she knew. A few relatives applauded softly, as if this introduction were a sweet family moment. But something had unsettled Blake. His stance was off, his breathing too deliberate, his eyes searching my face as if he were trying to peel away years of missing context. And yet, Elise was too absorbed in her own narrative to notice. Now come on, she said, tugging him back toward the table. Sit, babe, you're starving. Let's continue eating. Blake allowed himself to be pulled away, but he looked back again, one more lingering glance, longer than the last, heavy with questions he wasn't ready to ask. I sat down slowly, folding my napkin with the same discipline I used in mission briefings. My pulse stayed steady, my breathing stayed even. But inside, I felt the shift. The crack. The first tremor beneath the surface. Elise thought she had set the stage for a final, triumphant humiliation. She had no idea she had lit the fuse instead. The room settled, conversation resumed. But the air had changed. Blake's instincts had awakened. And the moment his memory caught up with them, everything Elise believed about herself, about me, about this perfect Christmas would ignite beyond her control. The match was already burning, all it needed was oxygen. Blake took his seat again, but the movement wasn't smooth this time. His posture was perfect, almost too perfect. His back ramrod straight, shoulders high, like his body had slipped into disciplined readiness without his mind's permission. Elise didn't notice. She was too busy smoothing her dress and basking in the attention that still lingered around her like perfume. Dinner continued, conversations rising again like a choir restarting after a brief pause, and plates clattered softly against the table. But Blake's eyes kept flicking toward me, sharper with each glance, less confused now, more searching, more remembering. Something in him was clawing upward, fighting through fog, piecing together fragments Elise's narrative couldn't explain. I lifted my glass of water and took a slow sip. My hand didn't tremble, my breath didn't shift. But I watched him carefully, not with fear, not with tension, only with the steady readiness of someone who had expected this moment for years. Then it happened. It was small, so small most people wouldn't have noticed. But Blake did. The candle near my elbow flickered from a gust that leaked through the fireplace, and I instinctively shifted my posture, adjusting my stance just half an inch. A military microcorrection. The kind honed through thousands of hours of drills. His eyes snapped to the movement. He froze. And suddenly, everything he had been trying to remember slammed into place. He inhaled sharply, his hand knocking against the stem of his wine glass. The glass wobbled, slipped, and shattered on the floor. A few relatives gasped. My mother flinched. Elise groaned dramatically. "Blake, be careful, that carpet is new." But Blake didn't hear her. His stare was locked on me, wide, horrified, reverent. His lips parted. His breath hitched. Recognition dawned with the slow, devastating clarity of a sunrise. He stood. Too fast. His chair screeched backward against the hardwood floor. The room fell silent again. Elise blinked up at him, confused. "Babe?" But he wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at anyone but me. And then, he stepped back once. Twice. His boots clicked like gunshots in the hushed room. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened. His spine straightened to full height, shoulders squared, muscles coiled in instinctive respect. Every SEAL instinct in his body surged to the surface, unstoppable. And in a voice that thundered through the dining room like an explosion, he barked. "Admiral Hawthorne on deck." The word slammed into the room, shaking the air, shattering the illusions, stripping away every lie my family had built around me. The table went dead still. A fork clattered out of someone's hand. A child whimpered. My aunt gasped loud enough to echo. My father's jaw dropped open mid-chew, food forgotten. My mother's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. And Elise. Sweet, perfect, golden Elise. Went pale. Then paler. Then impossibly white. Admiral? My father whispered. Blake didn't break his stance. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe wrong. His voice shook only with awe, nothing else. He saluted, fully saluted, his arms snapping to his brow with textbook precision, his voice resonating like a command at a classified briefing. "Ma'am." Elise stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "Blake, what are you doing?" "That's my sister." He didn't answer her. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on me, waiting for acknowledgement. Waiting for orders. Waiting for protocol. I didn't move for a few seconds. I let the silence settle, the disbelief tighten around the room like a closing fist, the weight of what was happening sink into every person who had once laughed at me. Then, slowly, deliberately, I rose from my chair. No dramatic gasp. No trembling. No surprise. Just a quiet, controlled exhale, the kind that comes from someone who has lived too long under false narratives. The kind that comes from someone who had been preparing for this truth to surface eventually. The room remained frozen as I stepped forward. Blake's salute held firm, unwavering. My mother whispered, This has to be a mistake." My father muttered. "She dropped out, she couldn't." A cousin stammered. "Admiral that's impossible." But Blake didn't lower his salute. Because he knew exactly who I was now. Exactly what I was. "Sir," I said quietly, using the calm tone I'd used 1,000 times before in situations far more dangerous than this dinner table. "Commander." He swallowed hard. "Ma'am." "Stand easy," I said. His shoulders dropped. His arm lowered. But his respect didn't fade even an inch. The shock in the room deepened. My mother finally found her voice, small and trembling. "Marina, what on earth is he talking about?" Elise shook her head violently. No, this is some joke. She failed training. She cannot be." But Blake's voice cut through hers like a blade. "She's Admiral Hawthorne, one of the highest ranking officers in naval intelligence. Her clearance level is above mine." Gasps. Whispers. A ripple of disbelief that fractured the facade of every smug assumption ever made about me. And yet this was only the first twist. Only the beginning of the truth. Because the room still didn't know why I had disappeared. Why I had let them believe I'd failed. Why I had allowed myself to be erased. That truth, the deeper, darker truth, was still waiting in the shadows of what came next. And it would hit even harder. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. No one blinked. No one even dared exhale. Blake stood rigid, eyes forward, waiting, every muscle locked with the reverence of a man who had just realized he'd been sitting beside a ghost with a pulse, a legend disguised as a disappointment. My family stared at me as if the earth had tilted beneath the table. But the silence didn't last. Not with what happened next. Because Blake, still fighting the shock pulsing through him, took a slow step toward me and said, voice low and precise. "Shadowcrest." Ha! Every drop of blood in my mother's face drained. My father's fork clattered to the plate. Elise's breath caught audibly. Because that word, that codename, was not one civilians were ever supposed to hear. Not even most military personnel. Only 4 people inside the Pentagon knew it. Blake Rowan was one of them. He wasn't addressing Marina, or the girl who dropped out, or the family embarrassment. Artino. He was addressing the operative who had disappeared from all internal logs 5 years earlier, the one whose missions lived behind sealed doors. My aunt gasped, clutching her chest. "Shadow, what? Did he say what is that?" My mother finally found her voice, choked and brittle. "Admiral, what? Who? Marina? No, this has to be." My father shook his head violently. "She didn't even finish the academy. She flunked out. This is impossible." "Oh." Elise stared at Blake like he had personally betrayed her, her voice rising in panic. "Why are you calling her that? She's nobody." She's. Blake snapped toward her, eyes sharp. "Elise." His tone made her shrink instantly. Then he looked at me again, this time with full, unfiltered recognition. Respect settled into every line of his posture. He saluted again, not because protocol demanded it, but because instinct left him no choice. "Admiral Hawthorne," he said, louder now, firmer, as if anchoring the truth into the minds of everyone watching. "Ma'am." This time, the room felt the weight of the title not as a shouted shock, but as an undeniable reality. I stepped forward slowly, hands moving behind my back in a flawless parade rest dance. The movement was quiet, controlled, unmistakably authoritative. Elise stumbled backward into her chair. Someone whispered, "No, that can't be." Another muttered, "But she's just." A cousin whimpered, "What is happening?" My mother lurched to her feet. "Marina, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? Why would you hide?" I held up one hand without looking at her. She stopped mid-sentence. Blake did too. "Commander," I said calmly. "As you were. This is a family dinner, not a briefing." He lowered his salute immediately, stepping back into a neutral stance. "Yes, ma'am." The simplicity, the certainty, the seamless obedience. It gutted whatever illusion my family had left. Because only someone who had earned his rank, his loyalty, and his fear would ever speak to a SEAL commander like that. A stunned ripple passed through the room. My mother tried again, voice cracking. Why, you're an admiral? My father stuttered. But they said you dropped out, your instructor told us. I offered no clarification. Not yet. Not here. Instead, I walked back to my seat quietly. And that quietness was the loudest thing in the room. But my family panicked, gasping, scrambling, didn't know how to handle silence from me anymore. Not when silence no longer meant smallness. Not when silence now meant power. My mother rushed forward, voice trembling with a mix of fear and frantic pride. Everyone, you hear that? Our Marina Admiral Hawthorne. My daughter the Admiral. Elise, say something. Tell them you always knew. But Elise couldn't speak. Her lips opened, closed, opened again, but every sound strangled itself in her throat. Blake attempted to reclaim control of the situation in the way he'd been trained to diffuse chaos. Ma'am, he said to me quietly, if I'd known it was you tonight, I would have. You would have acted no differently. I didn't raise my voice, but the command in it snapped him shut immediately. Yes, ma'am, he said. My relatives began tripping over each other in an attempt to apologize, congratulate, justify, explain. Marina, why didn't you tell us? We always believed in you, honey. Such a prestigious rank, you should have shared. We would have thrown a celebration. I simply looked at them. Not unkindly. Not bitterly. Just looking. And they wilted. Because for the first time, I wasn't the child who needed their approval. I wasn't the disappointment seeking validation. I wasn't the shadow begging for light. I had become someone they didn't recognize. Someone they had never taken the time to know. Someone who existed beyond the boundaries of their limited imagination. My mother reached toward me for a hug, tears welling in her eyes. Come here, sweetheart, let me. I stepped back. Just a few inches. But the message was unmistakable. She froze midair. Marina? I'm fine where I am, I said quietly. Elise finally found her voice cracked, breathless. All this time, you let us think you failed? I didn't answer. Because the truth she wanted, the truth the entire room suddenly needed, was not one I owed them. Not yet. Not after years of being erased. Not after they had built their pride around the myth of my mediocrity. They stared at me, desperate, bewildered, unraveling. Their world had collapsed in a single moment. Their hierarchy shattered. Their golden child dethroned. Their story rewritten. But this was only the first collapse. The real truth, the one that would break them completely, still waited behind the next breath. The room stayed frozen in that suspended breath, one collective inhale, dozens of eyes locked on me, waiting, trembling, unraveling. Even the candles seemed to hold their flames still, as if the entire house knew the next words would rewrite the last 5 years of every life in the room. My mother stepped forward first, voice thin and breaking. Marina, sweetheart, please say something, anything. Elise clung to the back of her chair like the ground might give way. My father stared as if the pieces of a puzzle he had assembled for decades had just been reduced to dust. And Blake, still standing at respectful ease, watched me with an intensity that came from a deeper, darker understanding. He knew that whatever came next was not meant for civilians. So I exhaled once. Slow. Steady. The same breath I used before walking into a briefing room where a dozen lives depended on what I said next. I was never kicked out of the academy, I said softly. The silence cracked like ice under weight. My mother covered her mouth. Elise's knees buckled. My father's eyes widened. I left, I continued, to go undercover. A sharp inhale rippled around the table. Someone whispered, undercover? Another murmured something about movies, but the words died quickly. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of years pressing through my spine, not heavy, not painful, simply there. 5 years ago, I said, I was assigned to infiltrate a military intelligence leak inside Colorado. A network of domestic operatives passing classified information to foreign contacts. My father blinked. Inside our state? I nodded once. Inside our city. My mother stumbled backward, hitting the table with a soft thud. No. No, Marina. That can't be. It was operational fact. Blake cut in, his voice steady and grave. Shadowcrest oversaw 3 undercover officers and 2 external analysts. The mission status was classified level 8. The room swallowed the words whole. I continued. To go undercover, I needed a full break from my existing record. No trace, no ties, no contact. And no one could suspect I was still in the service. So you let everyone believe you failed, Elise whispered. I met her eyes. Yes. 1. She looked stabbed by the simplicity of it. My father's voice was hoarse. But why? Why would that be necessary? Because the network we were investigating, I answered, targets families, anyone connected to an operative. Parents, siblings, fiancés, anyone vulnerable. My mother's hand flew to her throat. My father's jaw fell slack. Elise pressed a fist to her lips, trembling. I stepped closer to the table, the lights from the chandelier reflecting off the glass like trembling stars. The safest cover I could have, I said, was to become exactly what everyone already assumed I was. My mother staggered into a chair. A failure. My voice stayed calm. Yes. The word cut through the room like a clean blade, no anger, no accusation. Just truth. I continued. Every person in this house helped build the narrative without even realizing it. And that's what kept you alive. Elise choked on a breath. We kept what? You kept yourself safe, I said. Your dismissal, your jokes, your embarrassment, your silence. All of it convinced the wrong people that I wasn't connected to anything worth targeting. Your jokes. My mother whimpered. Oh, God. I didn't move toward her. I didn't comfort her. 5 years ago, I said, we intercepted chatter about a list of families linked to military intelligence operatives. Families marked for retaliation. The room froze again. Elise's wine glass slipped from her hand, hitting the carpet with a muffled thud. And if they had known you were mine, I said, you would have been on that list. Blake stepped forward, voice low and respectful. Hawthorne was the only one positioned to break the chain from inside. She volunteered for the operation after we realized the threat included civilian relatives. My mother broke into tears. My father looked shattered. Elise covered her face with both hands, shoulders shaking. I did not cry. I had already done all my crying long before tonight, somewhere between leaving this house and crossing the threshold into a life no one here would ever fully understand. You disappeared, my father whispered, as if finally understanding. So they wouldn't see us as connected to you. Yes. You let us think you were lost. Yes. You let us believe you were nothing. A pause. Then, softly. It kept you alive. R.A.T. My mother sobbed harder, her body shaking. Marina. We said such awful things. We dismissed you. We belittled you. If I had known. You weren't supposed to know. That doesn't make it right, she cried. We never supported you. We never asked about your life. We never. You being ashamed of me, I said gently, was the only thing that protected you. The room went still again, not out of shock this time, but out of guilt so heavy it smothered every breath. Elise tried to speak, voice cracking. I treated you horribly. I pushed you down. I made fun of you. It kept you safe, I repeated. You never would have been able to pretend convincingly if you had treated me any other way. Elise collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. How could you do that alone? For so long? How did you? I looked at her calmly. Because it was my job. And because I knew none of you could carry it. Silence wrapped itself around the room again. But this silence was different from all the others. This one hurt. My father wiped his face with his hands. We don't deserve you. That's not what this is about. Blake added softly. Hawthorne risked her life for 5 years. She saved dozens of operatives and civilians. She dismantled the entire network from the inside. And all the while, I said, your safety depended on believing the worst about me. My mother's sobs became quieter, more fragile. Marina, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I didn't reach for her. I didn't reach for anyone. Because forgiveness was not the lesson here. And love was not the reward. Because after a lifetime of being unseen, unheard, underestimated, and misunderstood, the only thing I truly wanted, the only thing I had always wanted, was for them to be safe enough to live their lives without ever needing me. And they were. Because I had made it so. They cried. I didn't. Because I had already lived through every moment that brought them to these tears. And I had survived them all alone. The room stayed suspended between guilt and awe, a fragile, trembling silence hanging over every bowed head. My mother's tears fell freely. My father stared at the tablecloth as if all the years he'd ignored me were embroidered into it. Elise couldn't even look up. Her shoulders shook with small, uneven sobs. But none of that changed what needed to be said. None of that changed what had already happened. I took a soft breath, letting the weight of 5 years settle into my lungs one last time before releasing it. Then I spoke, my voice steady, not sharp, not cold, simply truthful. I didn't need you to be proud of me, I said. My mother lifted her head, eyes swollen, lips trembling. My father looked like he was bracing for a verdict. Elise clutched a napkin in both fists, knuckles bone white. I just needed you to be safe. Hi. My mother let out a sound between a sob and a plea. Marina, please don't leave like this. Let us make it right. Let us try. Try. A word she had never offered me before. I looked at her not with anger, not with resentment, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had long since outgrown the need for anything from the people who once raised her. This was never about right or wrong, I said gently. Or about forgiveness. It was never about proving anything. Elise lifted her face, streaked with mascara and desperation. Then, what do you want from us now? My answer came without hesitation. Nothing. The word fell like a glass shattering on marble. Soft. Clean. Final. I stepped back from the table and reached for my coat. Not in a rush. Not in anger. Simply with purpose. The same way I had walked into a dozen undisclosed locations, into danger with full confidence that the mission mattered more than the applause. I have spent years doing what needed to be done, I added, sliding one arm into my sleeve. Not what would earn me love, or approval, or recognition. My mother took a step forward, but I lifted a hand to stop her. She froze instantly. I'm not leaving because I'm angry, I said. I'm leaving because my work is done. Elise swallowed a sob. But, you're our family. I met her eyes so much like the younger version of her I had protected without her ever knowing. Family isn't always about being close, I said softly. Sometimes it's just about making sure everyone survives, even if they never know how. She broke again, her breath collapsing into her hands. My father wiped his face, voice ragged. Where will you go? I gave him the faintest, most bittersweet smile. Where I'm needed. And then, without ceremony, without dramatic exit, without raising my voice or ending with any grand gesture, I turned toward the front door. No one followed. No one dared. The only sound was the dull click of my boots across the wood floor, the distant hum of the heater, and the quiet unraveling of a family finally seeing the person they had overlooked for decades. I opened the door. A gust of cold December wind rushed in, swirling into the room as if nature itself intended to carry away the pieces of the world they had built on false assumptions. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and the silence that followed was absolute. I didn't return to that house again. Not the next day. Not the next month. Not even when word spread through distant relatives that Marina is actually someone important. I didn't correct their stories or entertain their remorse. Distance became my clarity, my freedom, my peace. My life resumed on the other side of the world: briefing rooms, long flights, classified corridors, and the quiet sense of purpose that had shaped me long before my family ever saw it. 1 year passed. Quiet, busy, uncomplicated by apologies or expectations. Then, in early December, I received an envelope forwarded through the Naval Routing Office. Heavy cardstock, gold foil edges, Elise handwriting. A wedding invitation. I sat with it for a moment, tracing the embossed letters with my thumb. She was marrying Blake. Of course she was. There was no bitterness in me. Nothing left to resent. Just a distant, gentle understanding of the way people cling to whatever makes them feel whole. I placed the invitation aside, picked up a pen, and wrote a short note on crisp white stationery. Clear skies. Stay safe. A.H. No advice. No congratulations. No memories. Just a wish. Simple, clean, and honest. I mailed it and returned to my work without another thought. I did not attend the wedding. I did not return home. I did not reopen wounds already healed. Because I had reclaimed my life not through vengeance, not through confrontation, not by changing them, but by finally stepping out of the shadows they once pushed me into. Honor had built me. Truth had shaped me. Silence had protected them. And distance, quiet, dignified distance, was what would protect me. I didn't leave to punish them. I left because I no longer belonged to the version of myself they remembered. I had become something else. Something stronger. Something whole. And stepping away wasn't the end of my story. It was the first time I had ever truly lived it.